Hello. Today we'll be dealing with a new lecture, a new novella during this new lecture, The Little Prince, which was originally published in French and was later translated into over 300 languages around the world, including English. Now, the work is considered as a classic in world literature, and it was published by the French aviator uh, and writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Uh, Now, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry had written extensively, but he was predominantly known in France for his contribution to the French Air Force. He had participated in the French mission during the Second World War and had played a small role in trying to influence the Americans to join the Second World War. In fact, the work that we have to study, The Little Prince, was in fact published, uh, was written by Exupéry while he was living in New York in the 1940s. So, uh, Exupéry was a remarkable man, and his knowledge of aviation and his experience as a pilot has played a role in his writings as well, and it's uh, very much evident, especially in the work that we have to study, The Little Prince. Now, let's take a look at some of the important aspects of the writer first before we get into the work. uh, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, 1900 to 1944. He died at the young age of 44. We'll talk about the mysterious disappearance of Exupéry towards the end. Uh, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry was a French aviator and writer whose works are a unique testimony of a pilot and a warrior who looked at adventure and danger with a poet's eyes. So he was someone who was not unfamiliar with danger and mystery and death because he had spent many years as a fighter, as a pilot, and had seen death in many forms while he was fighting the Second World War. So, what makes him unique as a writer is the fact that he was a warrior who looked at adventure and danger with a poet's eyes. So, that literary quality, that poetic quality, is quite evident in all of his works. And Le Petit Prince is the original title, or original French title of the novella, is a fable. A fable, as you all know, is a story that conveys a moral lesson. So, when you go through the story of Le Petit Prince or the Little Prince, you'll understand as to why this work is considered as a fable. So his fable Le Petit Prince or The Little Prince has become a modern day classic. Saint Exupéry came from an impoverished aristocratic family, and in 1921 he was conscripted into the French Air Force and he qualified as a military pilot a year later. So he was commissioned into the French Air Force in the year 1921, and he became a military pilot a year later, that is in 1922. Uh, Conscription, I hope you know the meaning of conscription. In many parts of the world, conscription is mandatory. That is, people of a certain age are supposed to join the army. They are supposed to join the armed forces. Okay, that particular system is referred to as conscription. Especially when there is war, when there is a war going on, many people are conscripted into the armed forces. In 1944, Exupéry took off from an airfield in Corsica. Corsica is an island in France. You must have heard, some of you at least must have heard about Corsica. Corsica is an island that is often associated with Napoleon. So Corsica is a French island. So in 1944, he took off from an airfield in Corsica to conduct a reconnaissance mission over France and never returned. 60 years later, wreckage from the sea, raised from the seabed near Marseille was identified as belonging to his plane. It had probably been shot down by an enemy fighter, though the cause of the crash may never be known. So, from 1944 onwards, the uh, people had no idea, the government, the authorities had no idea what exactly had happened to Antoine de Saint Exupéry in 1944. His a plane had gone missing. The plane that he was flying had gone missing. He was actually on a reconnaissance mission that he was conducting. He was on a mission as part of his official duties, but the plane went missing, and no one had any idea as to what happened to the plane or the pilot. And it was only 60 years later, in 2013, around 2013 2014, that uh, wreckage from seabed near Marseille. Marseille is again a place in France. So wreckage was raised from the seabed, and airplane wreckage was recovered, and which was identified as belonging to the Saint Exupéry's plane. But the body was never recovered. It had probably been shot down by an enemy fighter, and but no one really knows as to what really caused the crash. Now that brought a sad end, a sad, mysterious end to the remarkable life of this fine gentleman called Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Now, moving on to the novella that we have to learn, The Little Prince. This is one of the most famous images of the cover, The Little Prince. Now, the work was published in the year 1943. The Little Prince was originally published in French as Le Petit Prince. It was a fable. It's a fable and modern classic by French aviator and writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and was published with his own illustrations in French as Le Petit Prince in 1943. So the book came with illustrations that was done by Saint-Exupéry himself. French and English language versions of the novella were published in April 1943, although the book did not appear in France until 1946. So the book was originally written in the year 1943, and the English edition was also published in the year 1943. But the books hit the bookstands in France only in 1946. That is many years, around 2 years after the death of the writer Exupéry. Now, what is this novella all about? The simple tale tells the story of a child, the little prince, who travels the universe gaining wisdom. The novella has been translated into hundreds of languages and has sold over 200 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best selling books in publishing history. So, it goes on to show how popular this book has been. It was published over 70 years ago, right? But still, this book is still read across the world and is still as popular as ever before, and is one of the best-selling books in publishing history. Now, we can take a look at the story now. What is the story all about? This might take a while. The narrator is actually a pilot who has crash landed uh, in a desert in the Sahara. So much like the writer Exupéry, the narrator of the novella, The Little Prince, is also a pilot, and who is quite disillusioned with the world of adults. Now, he is a pilot, he is an adult himself. Now, one thing that you have to notice is that the names of individuals are never mentioned, the names of the characters are never mentioned. It's the narrator the Little Prince, the fox, the snake, the rose. These are the names. These are the character names. We do not really know. We are never really told the original names of either the narrator or the Little Prince. Okay, so the narrator of this novella uh, introduces himself as a man who learned when he was a child that adults lack imagination and understanding. He's now a pilot, and now at the beginning of the story, you find that his plane has crash landed in a desert in the Sahara. Consequently, he encounters a very serious little blonde boy who asks him for a drawing of a sheep, and the narrator obliges. So the narrator draws the picture of a sheep for the little blonde boy that he encounters in the desert. The narrator who calls the child the Little Prince. So it is the narrator who gives the child the name the Little Prince. Learns that the boy comes from a very small planet, which the narrator believes to be asteroid B612, but the Little Prince calls it asteroid 325. Okay, so this Little Prince has landed from an asteroid called B612, but he himself addresses his home as asteroid, refers to his home as asteroid 325. Over the course of the next few days, the Little Prince tells the narrator about his life. On his asteroid planet, which is no bigger than a house, the prince spends his time pulling baobab seedlings lest they grow big enough to engulf the tiny planet. So that is what the Little Prince does every day. Now, baobab trees are quite huge. They can grow to great heights. They grow uh, quite wide as well, quite huge basically. So the little prince tells the narrator that he spends his time in his planet pulling the baobab seedlings lest they grow big, otherwise they'll grow big enough to engulf the tiny planet. And remember, the planet that the little prince belongs to is no bigger than a tiny no bigger than a house. The planet is that small. One day, an anthropomorphic rose grows on the planet, and the prince loves her with all his heart. So he has been living all alone, all by himself, and suddenly, a rose, a tiny little rose, starts growing on the planet, and the prince uh, places all his devotion and love uh, on that rose. However, the vanity and demands made by the rose become too much for the prince, and he leaves. Now you might be wondering how can uh, Rose talk to the prince. Now remember, this is a fable. Now fables are known for these magical elements out of extraordinary events, right? Roses can talk here, foxes can talk here, a little prince can land on Earth from a tiny planet. So, all these things are possible in a fable. Now, suddenly, uh, disappointed with the rose, uh, our little hero leaves his planet. And what does he do after leaving the planet? The little prince, travels to a series of asteroids and encounters for the first time the strange, narrow minded world of grown ups. Now, he's traveling all across various planets. The little prince is able to travel to various other asteroids and tiny planets, and for the first time, he's going outside of his planet for the first time. So, this is for the first time that he sees the strange, narrow minded nature of adults. The first person that he meets is a king, from another planet who requires obedience but has no subjects until the arrival of the prince. So the first character, the first individual that he meets outside of his planet is a king who requires obedience, but he doesn't have any subjects to seek obedience from. And uh, the sole inhabitant of the next planet is a conceited man, is a vain man who wants nothing but from the prince but flattery. So he is a very conceited, vain man who expects everyone to flatter him. That is the second person that the prince encounters. Thirdly, the prince meets a drunkard who explains that he must drink to forget how ashamed he is of drinking. It's quite ironical, isn't it? The drunkard says that he drinks because he wants to forget the shame of drinking. He wants to forget how ashamed he is of drinking. The fourth planet introduces the prince to a businessman who maintains that he owns the stars, which makes it very important that he know exactly how many stars there are. So this is the fourth character that he encounters, a businessman who again is quite arrogant and he claims that he owns all the stars in the universe, and therefore it is important for him to know exactly how many stars there are. The fifth character the prince encounters is a lamplighter who follows orders that require him to light a lamp each evening and put it out each morning. So, this lamplighter lights a lamp every evening and puts it out each morning. Even though his planet spins so fast that dusk and dawn both occur once every minute. So, this dusk and dawn are appearing every few minutes. So he is this lamplighter is lighting the lamp, putting out the lamp every few minutes. Finally, the prince comes to a planet inhabited by a geographer. Sorry, by a geographer. The geographer, however, knows nothing of his own planet because it is his sole function to record what he learns from explorers. He asks the prince to describe his home planet, but when the prince mentions the flower, the geographer says that flowers are not recorded because they are ephemeral. They are not permanent. So it is the geographer who tells the little prince that flowers can wilt, they are not there forever, their beauty will not remain forever, they are ephemeral in nature, they are very transient, they are very uh, temporary objects. Okay, so the geographer recommends that the little prince visit the earth.